Let's get started. Let's have a small, brief introduction towards what is this data studio, the Azure Data Studio, and how it is going to be helpful for us, and how we are going to benefit ourselves in terms of resume and for our daily routine job work with the concepts we are going to learn, practice, and involve in this course. Azure Data Studio, a nice, wonderful component. It's a tool actually. It's a free tool from Microsoft. This is Sai Fanindra from SQL School, assuring you complete practice orientation from scratch. Let's understand what is Azure Data Studio. Let's understand how this Azure Data Studio is going to help us from development, administration, and ETL perspective. Come on, let's get started now. Let's go slowly step by step. Before we step into the Azure Data Studio tool, we may get a question like why we need to step into it. Yes, you're all aware of SQL Server, the prerequisites for this course. You're all aware of SQL Server and you're aware of SSMS tool as well, SSMS, SQL Server Management Studio. An alternative for Management Studio, we have Azure Data Studio, our actual course. So ADS would be the next level cloud-based interface for our well-known SSMS, SQL Server Management Studio. So this particular Azure Data Studio course is planned for working SQL Server developers, SQL DBAs, and Azure data engineers. You have prior knowledge of SQL Server, hence you are into this wonderful, beautiful, short course called Azure Data Studio for our job work as well as to get some new keywords, buzzwords, and concepts into our resume. Let's understand what exactly the Data Studio means. Yes, it is an interface, a nice, cool interface for what? Development, management, and ETL environment. I repeat, development, management, and ETL environment. We are going to understand from scratch on how to perform the installations. We'll do it slowly, step by step. But let's understand the basic difference today. Assuming, yes, you have prior knowledge of SQL Server, this Azure Data Studio is containing the components from local SQL Server Management Studio tool as well as few options from the Azure Cloud Portal, the Azure portal. In simple words, the main basic information to start with, Data Studio and user interface tool to connect to local SQL servers as well as Azure SQL servers. Perform design, testing, and of course, limited management operations. Management Studio is completely into management, awesome management techniques. Data Studio is for a different purpose, development, management, and ETL. When it comes to dev, management, and ETL, out of these three items, that management is a limited item. It's more into development and ETL activities. But at the same time, the kind of monitoring, the kind of dashboards we have in ADS, Azure Data Studio, are really awesome compared to Management Studio. The question arises why Microsoft came up with ADS, the Azure Data Studio tool, when someone can happily continue to operate with SSMS either for local SQL servers as well as for Azure. Why we require ADS? Yes, mainly to target non-Microsoft operating systems. We know SSMS can be installed only in Windows. ADS can be working with Mac and Linux as well. So the basic differences to start our learning, the basic differences between SSMS and ADS tool. Once again, this particular short course is a 10 chapter course, is mainly planned for the participants who are already having knowledge on SQL Server and usage of SSMS tool. So having knowledge of SSMS tool already, the SQL Server Management Studio tool, we should get a question like why we require ADS, or in what cases we need to use ADS. Yes, SQL Server Management Studio is applicable for Windows only, whereas ADS for any OS. You have Windows and Mac and Linux, all three. SSMS for design, testing, and management activities. More into management, whereas ADS is something different. It is for DB design, testing, and deployment activities. The real world deployment concepts. SSMS supports TSQL scripts, whereas ADS has TSQL scripts and notebooks. We have scripts and something called notebooks. Both are different. We have TSQL scripts, and here comes TSQL and something else called Python. Many people think Python is a programming language. Correct, but not complete. Python is not only a programming language, it can be used by ETL engineers as well as data scientists for machine learning activities. In our classes, we'll understand how to use Python from SQL Server perspective for the day-to-day database operations using Data Studio. Our traditional SQL Server Management Studio cannot help us to play with Python scripts, but ADS welcomes us into the world of data science, Python, and machine learning. And from migration perspective, SSMS has good amount of on-premise to Azure migration activities, whereas here it is limited migration options. SSMS includes profiler and DTA tool, SQL profiler and DTA tool, whereas here no profiler and DTA tools, but at the same time we have interactive dashboards. Very powerful real world dashboards are available in Azure Data Studio. Based on these basic information, based on these points, let's get a overview of what we are going to learn in our classes. Yes, here it is. In our classes, we are going to learn from scratch pertaining to Azure Data Studio. We'll start with cloud concepts, assumption, the prerequisites, SQL Server, TSQL, and SSMS uses. We'll start from the basics of cloud, slowly step into Azure Cloud, Azure Data Studio, and we'll proceed for the concepts pertaining to SQL Server connections. We'll do SQL Server connections. Then comes something called as Azure SQL Server. First, connections. From connections comes The deployment activities. We'll do various deployment concepts. This is local SQL Server connections. To be more specific in our journey plan, then Azure SQL Server deployment activities. We'll do Azure SQL Server deployments. Then Azure SQL database creations. Something called D2U and pricing tiers. ADS, the Azure Data Studio, uses notebooks, big data operations, and imports will do. Then slowly move on to the next level. Management Studio versus ADS tool, features, query editor, engineering, admin, and programming features. We have something called polyglot. We'll do something called polyglot performance, pipelines, OLTP, warehouse, OLAP, and big data solutions will do. Then we shall proceed for something called query store, dashboards, insights, more into reporting activities, query plans, query store, different from query plans. In ADS, we have new query plans from Microsoft, from performance tuning activities. Okay, next. We'll understand about widgets, something called insights, widgets, and table designer activities. Okay, next. Then we'll be practicing table spaces, something called snippets, migrations, DMA tools. Very, very important item in case you are going for import exports and use case scenarios. Okay, next. With this information, concept wise FAQs. Okay, and concept wise FAQs. Apart from FAQs, we'll be having the resume points, like how we are going to get the resume shape with respect to Data Studio. For example, for developers, how it is going to help us, administrators. At the same time, ETL engineers, because for everyone, Data Studio is now being a common tool. You'd be having complete hands-on with all these concepts, planned for about 10 different chapters. The complete detailed content on our website. The link to be provided separately anyway. So here we'll be understanding from scratch. Make sure you have SQL Server installed 2 times in your computer to make it more clear for our lab plan. This is your computer. Make sure, because we are going to understand about migrations and other activities. So in your computer, if you are from our SQL Server or SQL DBA classes, you already have SQL Server installed twice in your computers. For others, make sure you have 2 SQL servers. Number 1, with 2017 or 19, this would be one server. 2017 or 19 or 2022, second server. And a tool called SSMS tool right? So here some tool called SSMS tool. Make sure it's already installed. We are going to install one more tool called ADS tool. We'll do it. And install something else called DMA, Data Migration Assistant tool. And we are going to configure one Azure account. So you need to have a credit card to activate your free trial on your own. This will be your Azure account. We'll provide you the steps and you will do the activation yourself and get our guidance if required. And make sure we have our configurations ready to enroll into the course. Last two items will take care, that is Azure Data Studio. This is Azure Data Studio. This part will take care. And something called DMA tool, Data Migration Assistant tool. These two tools will take care. Next, I'll just note this one. Make sure you install SSMS tool, SQL Server Management Studio. Okay, and install SQL Server 1. This is your SQL Server 1. I mean instance 1, okay? And also install instance 2. We need it for our classes. Inside Azure account, we are going to configure something called servers. We are going to configure two Azure SQL servers and something else called storage accounts. Some additional components mainly for migration activities called storage accounts we are going to configure. Just to make it clear, this would be the set of components we are going to learn in our classes. And we are going to configure something else called ADLS account. So this would be your first logical SQL server. Simply say Azure SQL server. Okay, and this one would be another Azure SQL server. Just to make it clear, something like this. And we are going to have the connections from left to right. We shall have the connections from left to right in this way. Okay, so in your computer, make sure you have two light green boxes and this yellow box. Remaining part I'll take care. So this is a complete lab plan. Next, further clarifications, questions, if any, glad to assist you. I repeat once again, just make sure you revise SQL Server 2017 or higher, okay? 2017 or higher, so that we can have best results from this particular training program. Either you go for live or on demand video, either of them. Just make sure you have this SQL Server prerequisites. Any further questions or clarifications, glad to address.